你让我来救你的命，最好说声请字。
这次猎杀天魔教主，江湖上的同道几乎都出动了。
龙胖，拦住他！
既然来杀我，为何还要见礼？还有一位，也请现身吧。
Hello guys, how's everyone doing? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're checking out the Tales of Herding Gods episode 79 spoiler. This part gets pretty interesting, so I thought, why not share it with you guys? Alright then, let's jump straight into the story. The moment he said that, the entire hall just erupted. Ministers started whispering, arguing, leaning toward each other like they'd just heard something unbelievable. And honestly, you can't really blame them. A single cloud covering the entire Eternal Peace Empire? That's the kind of thing that sounds more like a legend than reality. Think about the scale for a second. The Eternal Peace Empire stretches about 90,000 miles from east to west, and 80,000 miles from north to south. That's massive. And now they're saying the entire territory has been buried under snow? Snow that's been falling for 6 or 7 straight days? Yeah, that shouldn't even be possible. Sure, divine arts practitioners can summon wind and rain. That's nothing new in this world. But even the strongest among them can only affect a small region. Maybe a city, maybe a valley. Controlling weather over an empire this big? No way. That's on a completely different level. And the strangest part? This clearly wasn't a normal natural disaster. See, south of the Gold River, it almost never snows. Go even further south, past the Surging River, and cold weather basically doesn't exist there. And when you reach the Lee River region, it's like summer all year round. Snow there? That's practically unheard of. But somehow, snow had fallen over the entire empire. At the same time, you can imagine the tension building in the hall. Emperor Yanfang suddenly gave a light cough, and just like that, the buzzing discussions died down. The room went quiet. He looked across the ministers and said calmly, "Minister of Agriculture, many here probably don't understand how serious this snow is. Explain it to them." An old minister slowly stepped forward from the ranks. This was the Minister of Agriculture, the man responsible for the crops and farming of the entire empire. After bowing respectfully, he spoke in a steady voice. "Your Majesty, ministers, the northern villages will likely endure this disaster. They are accustomed to harsh winters and usually prepare for them." He paused slightly. "The real problem is the south." That alone already made a few ministers stiffen. After such a massive snowfall, he continued, "The villages in the south will most likely be frozen completely. When next year arrives, it is very likely there will be no harvest at all. No harvest." The Minister of Revenue immediately stepped forward, frowning. "When you say the south, what exactly do you mean?" The old minister didn't hesitate. "Everything south of the Gold River." And the moment those words landed, the entire hall inhaled sharply. Even Quan Mu couldn't hide his shock. He knew the map of the Eternal Peace Empire well. The Gold River begins in the Great Ruins and stretches tens of thousands of miles before flowing into the ocean. Everything south of it was huge. 2/3 of the empire's land, which meant something terrifying. 2/3 of the empire might have no harvest next year. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then suddenly the Grand Servant stepped forward and bowed urgently. "Your Majesty, we should immediately redirect rations and fodder from all regions to the south and prepare relief. The south has just gone through war, and many counties are already struggling. I'm afraid their food supplies have long been depleted. Your Majesty, please transfer rations from the north and save those people from disaster." But before the emperor could respond, the Minister of Agriculture let out a heavy sigh. "I'm afraid that may not be possible." The hall fell silent again. "The recent war has already exhausted most of the empire's grain reserves," he explained. "There is very little left anywhere. If we send all the remaining rations south now, the starving people will eat them immediately." He looked around the hall, his voice growing heavier. "And once those rations are gone, we won't even have seeds left to plant." No one interrupted him. "When autumn comes," he finished quietly, "there will be nothing left to eat." Then he said something that made the atmosphere even darker. "Lord Grand Servant, when starving people have nothing left, they will begin eating humans." The words hung in the air like a blade. One minister couldn't hold back and shouted, "Then what? Are we supposed to just let the people of the South starve?" The Minister of Agriculture shook his head slowly. "We must send provisions," he said, "but only in limited amounts. Just enough for them to survive." Then he revealed another problem. There are actually granaries in the south, but they belong to influential families and powerful landlords. If we try to take their supplies, they may incite the disaster victims to rebel." He bowed toward the throne. "Your Majesty." At that moment, Emperor Yanfang's expression darkened. For a few seconds, he said nothing. Then he spoke slowly, his voice calm but heavy. "I will deal with the provisions held by those influential families and landlords." He looked across the hall. "Continue."
The Minister of Agriculture wasn't finished yet. He slowly lifted his head and said, "Yes, other than the south, there's another disaster coming." The hall went quiet again. "The north is always cold during winter," he continued. "But this year, it's far worse." You could almost feel the weight in his voice. "I personally walked through several counties in the north," he said, "and I saw farmers chopping down trees just to burn them for warmth." Now imagine that scene for a second. Entire forests just disappearing because people are desperate to stay alive. "As a result," he said, "many forests have already been cleared. The land is becoming bare." He paused for a moment before dropping the real problem. If the north, where people are used to the cold, has already resorted to cutting forests just to survive, then you can imagine what the situation in the south must look like. Yeah, that part hits hard. "And if the forests in the south are completely cleared," he continued, "then mountain torrents, landslides, and floods will follow endlessly." In other words, this wasn't just one disaster. This could start a chain reaction. "A natural disaster can trigger a man-made disaster," he said quietly. "And a man-made disaster can trigger even more natural disasters." Then he gave the ministers the cruel truth. "But if we forbid the victims from chopping trees for warmth, countless people will freeze to death." The hall fell completely silent. "When that happens," he finished slowly, "most families will die." Yeah, no good choice here. Emperor Yanfang let out a deep breath, and suddenly the entire imperial court felt suffocatingly quiet. You could literally hear people breathing, because now the empire was trapped in an impossible dilemma. Let people cut trees, and the land collapses with floods and landslides later. Stop them from cutting trees, and they freeze to death. And all of this from a single snow disaster. Minister of Agriculture continued, "The most crucial problem is that we don't know how long this cloud will last." Right, that mysterious cloud again. "If it disperses in a few days, we can still minimize the damage," he said. "But if it doesn't," he didn't even need to finish the sentence. "The empire will be in danger." That was enough. Emperor Yanfang slowly leaned back on his throne, looking, honestly, exhausted. "I understand," he said quietly. Then he looked at all the ministers. "Now, my dear ministers, do you understand how dangerous the situation is?" His tone grew heavier. "Recently, some rebels caused trouble, but I didn't worry about it. I knew the imperial preceptor and my ministers would crush them easily." He paused. "But this snow disaster, and this cloud," his eyes darkened, "could destroy the fate of eternal peace." The entire court stayed silent. "Does anyone have a solution?" And that's the moment where everyone looked at the floor, because even the most powerful officials in the empire couldn't blow away a cloud that covered the whole sky, or melt snow across an entire continent. Emperor Yanfang looked at them, and you could see the frustration building. Seriously, was snow and a single cloud really about to tear apart an empire that took 100 years to build? Then suddenly, one civil official stepped forward. "I believe," he said cautiously, "this is because the imperial preceptor's reform has angered heaven." The moment those words came out, boom, Emperor Yanfang exploded with rage. "Drag him out and execute him." The entire court froze. The official immediately collapsed to his knees and shouted desperately, "Your Majesty, heaven has its heavenly law. The imperial preceptor's reforms are changing the heavenly law, so heaven has become angry. The people are suffering from heaven's punishment." Oh boy, wrong thing to say. "Men," Emperor Yanfang roared, "a disaster is threatening our empire, and you're still spreading lies to confuse the people. If he isn't executed now, should I do it myself?" Guards rushed in instantly. They grabbed the official and dragged him out while he screamed and begged. His cries echoed through the hall, getting quieter and quieter as he was pulled away. Then silence returned. Emperor Yanfang began pacing back and forth, trying to control his anger. "I need ministers who can solve problems," he said coldly, "not useless puppets who only know how to slander." Then he pointed to the court. "This reform was my decision, not the imperial preceptor's." His voice echoed across the hall. "If heaven is angry, it should punish me." He took a deep breath. "The imperial preceptor is a once-in-1,000-years talent. Even in 500 years, you may not find another like him." Then he looked at everyone again. "Now, think of a solution." His tone turned deadly serious. "And if you can't think of one, none of you will go home." He paused. "And none of you will celebrate the new year." Yeah, that's pressure. Then suddenly, a voice came from the hall.
"Your Majesty, why not store the cloud?" Everyone turned toward the speaker. "Wait, store the cloud?" The voice continued calmly. "If we cannot chase it away, why not simply store it?" Now that got everyone's attention. Emperor Yanfeng also looked over. "Oh," he said, "so it's Palace Grandi." It was Qin Mu. "What brilliant idea do you have?" the emperor asked. Qin Mu stepped forward and spoke casually. "I once saw treasures in the army called fire bottle gourds. Soldiers store their true fire inside them and release it during battle." Then he continued, "And when the Hell of Supreme Healing once paralyzed the entire Imperial College by accident, the former Grand Chancellor used a bottle gourd to store the anesthesia gas." He looked up at the sky as if imagining it. "So I was thinking, if bottle gourds can store fire and gas," he smiled slightly, "couldn't we store the dark cloud as well?" For a moment, the hall went completely still. Emperor Yanfeng turned to one of his generals. "General Qin," he asked, "is this possible?" The general stepped forward. His name was Qin Zhen, the general of heavenly strategies and also the head of the powerful Qin family. "Your Majesty," he said, "Palace Grandi's idea is indeed possible." But then he shook his head slightly. "However, the army does not have enough bottle gourds," he explained further. "The ones we use are wood hysteria bottle gourds given to the Vermilion bird troops across the empire. In total, there are about 1 million of them." Sounds like a lot, right? Not really. That amount, he said, would only be enough to clear the cloud above a single province. And the empire had many provinces, so relying on the army alone? Impossible. But Qin Mu wasn't finished. "Even if the army doesn't have enough," he said, "the empire does." Now the ministers looked at him again. "There are countless officials who cultivate spells," he explained. "There are powerful practitioners in noble families, and the imperial court itself has many strong divine arts practitioners." Then he dropped the real plan. "With a decree from your Majesty, all of them could create treasures to store the clouds. County magistrates, local officials, powerful cultivators, everyone would take responsibility for their own regions. With the army assisting them," he said, "we could gradually remove the clouds across the empire." Now that actually sounded possible. Emperor Yanfeng thought about it for a moment. "It may be difficult to mobilize every divine arts practitioner," he said slowly. "Some wandering practitioners in the martial world do not obey the imperial court." Qin Mu nodded. "Which is why your Majesty must set the example." Now that made the ministers tense up. "If your Majesty personally leaves the capital and travels across the provinces to store the clouds," Qin Mu said, "the people of the world will naturally follow." The court instantly exchanged uneasy glances, because everyone understood the problem. The emperor leading the capital, right after a rebellion? Yeah, assassins would come out of everywhere. The imperial preceptor himself had been ambushed not long about. If the emperor traveled the empire now, danger would be everywhere. But then, Emperor Yanfeng's eyes suddenly lit up, and he smiled. "Good." He looked at Qin Mu. "Minister Qin, do you have any other ideas for dealing with the snow disaster?" Qin Mu shook his head. "The disaster has already arrived. I cannot stop it." Then he added something interesting. "I once heard a saying, 'The path of a saint is no different from that of an ordinary person.'" The ministers frowned slightly, listening. "If the sun melts the snow," Qin Mu continued, "then the divine arts practitioners of the empire can personally go help the villages, help replant crops, send wind if there is no wind, remove weeds, kill insects, burn away frost. In other words, use cultivation power to help rebuild agriculture. If enough practitioners help," he said, "there may still be a harvest next year." And just when his plan finished, a civil official stepped forward, shaking with anger. "Your Majesty," he pointed at Qin Mu, "these are the words of a devil." The entire court froze again. "This will damage the country and harm the people." Then he shouted loudly, "He should be executed immediately."
Far to the west of the Eternal Peace Empire, something interesting was happening. High above the clouds stood the great Thunderclap Monastery, sitting proudly on the peak of the majestic Mount Meru. From up there, the world looked completely different. The monastery's golden rooftops shimmered under the sunlight, while beneath it, the clouds stretched out like a white ocean. And right at the edge of that ocean of clouds stood old Rulai, quietly looking toward the distant territory of Eternal Peace Empire. From his vantage point, he could actually see it, the massive cloud covering the empire, the sunlight reflected off it, turning that sea-sized cloud strangely bright. Old Rulai narrowed his eyes slightly. "This cloud is big enough," he said slowly, "yet not big enough." The monks around him listened in silence. Then he added something unsettling. "This cloud and the snow in Eternal Peace Empire are more like a warning." Yeah, a warning. Below him, rows of bodhisattvas, venerables, and arhats sat respectfully, listening to every word. Old Rulai continued calmly. "Long ago, in the history of the Great Thunderclap Monastery, we once witnessed a similar meteorological attack. Now that made everyone pay closer attention. That one," he said, "was even larger than this. Heavy snow,
a massive dark cloud, and the consequences were devastating. The people had no way to survive, he said quietly. Natural disasters followed year after year, and countless lives were lost. The monks exchanged uneasy glances. Then old Rulai called out, "Venerable Ku, go to the depository of Buddhist texts and bring the Emptiness-era Mourning Emperor scriptures. Turn to page 1367. A monk with a worried expression immediately stood up and hurried away. A moment later, he returned carrying an enormous ancient scripture. Carefully, he flipped through the fragile pages until he found the passage. The hall grew quiet as he began reading. Emptiness Era, Mourning Emperor year 6420. Changes in the meteorological phenomenon. Snow fell for 30 days. A cloud covered 80,000 miles. The sun could not be seen. 30 days of snow. 80,000 miles of cloud. Yeah, that already sounds terrifying. Starving people were everywhere. Bandits rose across the land. Mourning Emperor ordered the gods and dragon kings to suppress them, but that wasn't the worst part. Venerable Ku continued reading. Mourning Emperor year 6430. Meteors descended from the sky. The meteor shower fell like a flood. Tens of thousands of volcanoes erupted. The earth trembled and thousands of fissures opened, drying up the rivers. The monks began to look increasingly uneasy. The ocean was emptied. Wait, what? And the following year, the sun disappeared. No light came from the two heavenly bodies. At this point, the entire hall had gone completely silent. Behind old Rulai, Teacher Poor and the others felt their hearts pounding. Rulai, they said nervously. This is... Old Rulai slowly turned his head and looked behind Mount Meru toward the vast, uncivilized land stretching endlessly beyond the great ruins. Just hearing that name made everyone shudder. This ancient scripture, old Rulai explained, records the final moments of the divine kingdom that once ruled the great ruins. The monks held their breath. The heavy snow and the dark cloud, he said quietly, were only the first warning, only the first. But the warning we see today, old Rulai narrowed his eyes toward the distant empire, has appeared earlier than I expected, earlier and lighter, which meant something else entirely. It seems, he said calmly, that the actions of the Eternal Peace Empire have caught the attention of those above. The monks felt chills run down their spines. Teacher Poor, True Lord Tian, and the others could barely speak. Great ruins. Old Rulai looked back toward the empire again. If the emperor wishes to stop this disaster, he said, there is only one way. The monks leaned forward. He must immediately stop the reforms. Then came the shocking part, and surrender himself. Old Rulai's voice remained calm. He must beg forgiveness from heaven and from the people. Otherwise, old Rulai's gaze became deep and distant. This snow disaster will only be the beginning. And what comes next would be far worse. There will be meteor showers, volcanic eruptions, rivers and oceans drying up, the disappearance of the sun and the moon. In other words, the world itself would start falling apart. This, old Rulai said slowly, is the wrath of heaven, the anger of heaven that the people must bear. Even the monks listening felt overwhelmed. This is too much. Just then a monk approached and bowed. Rulai, he said, the Crown Prince of Eternal Peace has sent an envoy requesting an audience. Old Rulai paused slightly. Then he smiled. Oh, so the Crown Prince has come to find me after all. He nodded. Let him enter. At once, the monk replied. Old Rulai then looked at the surrounding monks and said with a faint smile, this Crown Prince is quite extraordinary. He might even become the savior of this world. He continued thoughtfully. The Emperor may stubbornly cling to his path, but the Crown Prince is different. Then he added calmly, his envoy is worth meeting. And while all of this was happening, far away in another sacred place, the Kunlun Yud Void Mountain, the holy land of the Tao sect. The mountain was called Yud Void Paradise, and honestly, it looked exactly like its name suggested. A world of its own. Spring existed there all year round. Flowers bloomed endlessly. Gentle winds moved through the valleys, and the whole place felt less like a mountain.
Out in the Tao sect sacred land, Kunlun Jade Void Mountain, the atmosphere felt almost unreal. Honestly, the place didn't look any less impressive than Mount Meru. The mountain was like its own little world. Spring all year round, peaceful winds drifting through the valleys, clouds lazily floating beneath the peaks. If someone told you immortals lived here, you'd probably believe it without question. And standing at the center of this paradise was the old Tao master, calmly looking toward the distant Eternal Peace Empire. That massive dark cloud in the sky? Yeah, even from here they could see it. He turned toward the gathered Taoist experts and spoke in a steady, unhurried voice. "The cloud covering Eternal Peace Empire is indeed a warning," he said, "but it is not overly dangerous." Then he added something interesting. "Compared to what happened in the Great Ruins, this is trivial." Now that's a scary comparison. The Taoists sitting around him listened quietly as he continued. "Our Tao sect opposed the reform of Eternal Peace Empire," he explained, "not for personal gain, but for the Tao itself." He slowly shook his head. That reform broke too many rules, too many principles. It was destined to fail. Then he sighed lightly. It's a pity that the imperial preceptor's knowledge was too shallow. He never understood the great terror that could descend. For a moment, his gaze turned distant, like he was remembering something. "You know," he said, "when the imperial preceptor was still young, he once came to Tao sect to meet me. Back then, the Tao master had been impressed. I could see he was extraordinary," he said, "so I allowed him to read our Tao sect's legacy scriptures. Normally, sects guard their teachings like treasure, but the Tao master had made an exception. For someone with that level of talent," he said calmly, "sectarian bias didn't matter. I hoped he would achieve great things. But things didn't go the way he expected. When he became the imperial preceptor," the Tao master said quietly, "my expectations turned into disappointment." "Why?" The Tao master finally explained. "It's because the Tao models itself after nature." The Taoists around him nodded slightly. "Because we follow nature," he continued, "Taoists can summon wind and rain. But there was an important limit. We cannot change wind and rain. We cannot change nature itself." And then he brought up another name. "I actually have no prejudice against the Heavenly Devil cult," he said. That alone surprised some of the Taoists. "In fact," he admitted, "I admire some of their actions." But then he shook his head again. "However, our paths are different." He looked at everyone around him. "The Tao originates from nature, but the Heavenly Devil cult wants to use the Tao to change nature. And right there," he said firmly, "that is the biggest difference between our Tao sect and the Heavenly Devil cult, which is also why people call them devils." Some of the Taoists shifted slightly at that statement. Then one of them, Donghua, spoke up. "I've seen Heavenly Devil cult disciples using spells to move clouds and create rain," he said. "That's actually true. During droughts, they summon rain and collect money from farmers. Others use drilling spells to create wells, solving drinking water problems. Some use true fire to smelt ore and forge farming tools. There were even devil cult disciples who charged farmers to hunt down demon beasts. In other words, they were actively changing the environment." Donghua concluded, "The Heavenly Devil cult really is going against the nature that Tao originates from." The Tao master nodded slowly. "Using divine arts for the benefit of common people is to change nature. And in his eyes, to change nature is to destroy it, which meant destroying the great Tao itself. The teachings of the Heavenly Devil cult are wrong," he said calmly, "which is why they have stepped onto the devil path." He continued explaining, "One of their teachings is to act straightforwardly and follow the course of nature. But in reality, that means letting desire run wild and doing whatever you want." He gave a faint sigh. "If that isn't what a devil does, then what is?" Then the Tao master said something heavier. "The imperial preceptor has been deeply influenced by the Heavenly Devil cult. That influence had even reached the empire's policies. He is using the ideology of the Heavenly Devil cult to govern a country, which, according to the Tao master, would lead to disaster. The calamities that destroyed the Great Ruins will eventually come to Eternal Peace Empire as well." He looked up at the sky. "This is heaven's punishment." But then his voice softened. "However, the people are innocent." That was the part that mattered most. He looked at the Taoists around him. "You will all go down the mountain." The disciples immediately straightened. The punishment invoked by the emperor and the imperial preceptor should not be borne by the common people. So what should they do? Go help the suffering villagers. Save whoever they could. And while traveling, if you encounter youths with good potential, he added casually, recruit them. Well, even during disaster relief, recruitment was still happening. The Taoists bowed together. "At your command." Soon, groups of experts began descending the mountain, heading toward the troubled lands of the empire. The Tao master remained alone, gazing at the cloud in the distance. "This burden should not fall on the people," he murmured. Then his expression turned slightly serious. "If the emperor and the imperial preceptor continue down the wrong path..." He paused. "Tao sect may have no choice but to enter the secular world, and that would change everything. Meanwhile,
somewhere else in the Empire, Kinlun was already taking action. He contacted the left and right guardians of the Heavenly Saint cult and issued a clear order. You two will assist the Emperor, Kinlun said. Help with disaster relief. Help store the dark clouds in the sky. Send disciples to the south to clear frozen farmland and replant crops. This snow disaster will kill many people, Kinlun said quietly. Do your best to save as many as possible. Then he added another warning, and make sure our disciples remain cautious. Because disasters don't just bring suffering, they bring chaos. With such a disaster, Kinlun said, riots will definitely occur. The world was not going to stay peaceful. The two guardians bowed. At your command. But before leaving, Left Guardian Ningdaochi hesitated. Sacred Cult Master, he asked carefully, under what identity should we assist the Emperor? Good question. If the Emperor grants us official titles, should we accept them? Kinlun thought for a moment. Then he nodded. Assist the Emperor using your own identities and the power of the sacred cult. And if titles came, accept them. After all, if the Emperor can tolerate the Imperial Preceptor, he can tolerate us too. Kinlun said it plainly. We are part of the Eternal Peace Empire. There's no need to be paranoid. Then he added something thoughtful. Even if chaos spreads across the world, most divine arts practitioners will never lower themselves to serve ordinary people. They were too used to standing about everyone else. Helping farmers? Helping villagers? To them, that was humiliating. Kinlun remembered something the Imperial Preceptor once said. He told me he had killed a batch of contrarians, but couldn't kill them all. Kill one group, another group appears. Back then, Kinlun thought it was a joke. Now, he realized it was true. Kinlun looked up at the massive dark cloud in the sky and gave a faint, ironic smile. This snow disaster could destroy an entire empire. Yet what were people arguing about? Whether something was devilish or not, whether it followed the orthodox path. Not once did they think about helping the people. They're too used to standing above others, Kinlun said, shaking his head. To them, helping commoners is degrading, so they call it the devil path. And there were plenty of people like that, even extremists. Some might even use this chaos as an opportunity to rebel, or target the Heavenly Saint cult itself. You too must be cautious, Kinlun warned. The guardians nodded confidently. Cultmaster, don't worry. Our cult has survived this long for a reason. Then they added proudly, we have stood strong against the so-called orthodox death all this time. With that, the two guardians bowed and left. Kinlun stood there quietly for a moment. He looked up at the dark cloud hanging over the entire Eternal Peace Empire. Then he shook his head, and calmly turned around, heading back toward the Imperial College.
By the time Chinmu got back to the ship, his little crew was already waiting. Hu Linger was there, of course. The dragon Killen was lazily lying nearby, looking half asleep, and the Dutan Devil King was hanging around with that usual smug expression on his face. Chinmu stepped aboard and casually said, on the way back to the village, we should buy some New Year's goods. Makes sense, right? But then he added something more serious. I'm afraid Border Dragon City might not have much left. With the Empire buried under snow and disaster looming everywhere, merchants probably weren't rushing into that place anymore. With Eternal Peace Empire in this kind of situation, Chinmu continued, there will probably be far fewer traders around. The Dutan Devil King lifted his head and looked up at the sky. The dark cloud above the Empire stretched endlessly, heavy and ominous. Then he chuckled. Heh, looks like your world is about to run into some serious trouble. He glanced sideways at Chinmu. That snow and dark cloud, it's covering the entire territory of your Eternal Peace Empire, right? Chinmu's eyes flickered slightly. Now that was interesting. He politely asked, Lord Devil King, do you happen to have some insight? The Dutan Devil King puffed up immediately, acting all high and mighty. Oh, of course I do. Then he grinned. Kneel down and lick my toes, and I might tell you. Yeah, he really said that. Chinmu didn't even bother responding. He just glanced at Hu Linger, and Hu Linger instantly understood. She quietly opened the compartment in the chest of the 8-armed god statue. Then she hopped inside and began controlling the statue like a puppet. Before the Dutan Devil King even realized what was happening, the statue moved. It grabbed him, forced him to kneel, and shoved his tongue out toward Chinmu's shoes. The Dutan Devil King immediately screamed. Devils can be killed but not humiliated. Stop, stop. He struggled wildly. I'll talk. Chinmu raised a hand calmly. Hu Linger relaxed her control. The Dutan Devil King jumped up instantly and spat twice on the ground, looking absolutely furious, but also very careful not to push his luck again. These past few days, Hu Linger had been way too clever. She'd bullied the poor Devil King so much that he'd learned an important survival lesson. A smart devil knows when not to fight back. So he wiped his mouth and sneered, though the arrogance in his voice had definitely toned down. That weather phenomenon in the sky, that's the work of a god. He looked at the massive cloud again, and not just any god.
Now that got Qinwu's attention. The Dutan Devil King crossed his arms. If my real body descended into this world, I could also create something like this. I could use a meteorological attack to wipe out the entire human race. He said it casually, like he was talking about swatting flies. I could erase your race and turn this world into the new Dutan realm. Yeah, terrifying thought. But then he squinted at the cloud again. However, the god who did this seems unusually gentle. Gentle? They didn't strike with full force. He shrugged. My guess, this snow and cloud are just a warning. Qinwu froze. A warning? That sentence echoed in his mind. Just a warning? This warning could easily kill millions of ordinary people who wouldn't survive the winter. He fell silent for a moment, deep in thought. His mind drifted back to the great ruins. Back then, a single decree from gods and devils had abandoned the people there, leaving them to suffer and be despised by the outside world. And suddenly, Qinwu's expression turned cold. If the gods and devils don't die, there will never be peace. His voice was calm, but the meaning behind it was sharp. Meanwhile, far above the world, standing on the clouds was the eternal peace imperial precept. He looked down at the massive dark cloud covering the empire and sighed softly. Beside him stood his wife. She wasn't a stunning beauty or anything extraordinary, just an ordinary-looking woman with a gentle presence. She had once been a palace maid given to him as a reward, and out of all those women, she was the only one who truly became his wife. But her mind? Sharp. She looked at him and asked thoughtfully, "You didn't return to the capital this time? Is it because you believe the emperor can handle this disaster?" The imperial precept smiled faintly. "Even if the emperor can't solve it," he said calmly, "someone will solve it for him." He didn't seem worried at all. "So there's no need for me to return." Then he looked toward the distant sky. "Come," he said gently. "Let's go to the little jade capital in the heavens." So guys, that was the episode 79 spoiler. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit the like button and tell me in the comments which episode you want next. And if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye guys!